Today's guest is a true inspiration, an author, speaker, and founder of Motivational Check LLC, with a diverse background spanning NCAA, Division basketball, SWAT hosted negotiation, business leadership, and coaching. His 13-year battle with cancer has shaped his powerful message of perseverance and living an extraordinary life. He is the author of Sustainable Excellence and featured writer in Perspectives of Cancer. Through his four truths, he inspires people to embrace adversity, control the mindset, and never quit. Let's dive into his incredible journey. Please welcome Terry. Hi, Terry.
Arban, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Awesome. First of all, I did try to, capture all the diversity in your character, different things you have done. But I would like to hear from yourself in case I have missed anything about your journey so far. So can you please tell us more about yourself?
Sure. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago, one of the larger cities here in the United States. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship despite having three knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of a fast food company here in the United States. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After my fast food time, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. I thought they did such a great job that I wanted to be part of that organization. And then at 37 years of age, I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And as you mentioned, part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a consulting business that dealt with school security. I coached girls' high school basketball when we lived in Texas here in the US. But as you mentioned, for the last 13 years or so, I've been battling this rare form of cancer, this rare form of melanoma.
Thank you, Terry. So I know that you have developed four truths, right, in your journey so far. So can you tell our audience what those four truths are and how can people apply them in their daily lives to, improve their life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have these four truths here on a post-it note here in my office. So I see them multiple times during the day and they constantly get reinforced in my mind. And they're just one sentence each. And I'll give them to you in the aggregate and then we can sort of break them down if you'd like. So the first one is control your mind or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one I look at kind of as a legacy type of truth, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the last one I think is pretty self-explanatory. It's as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I look at these four truths kind of, I guess I call them the bedrock of my soul. I just think they're a good place to start to try to build a quality life off of.
That's great. That's great. Some of them, I think I have mentioned in our previous talk that I do like reading Upanishads, like literature or text from the Hinduism, and they do cover exactly same thing. So somewhere humanity and human mind, I think they meet each other regardless of the culture and the religion. So that's great to hear. It's great to
Oh, I
hear.
agree. Totally. I mean, it doesn't matter where you come from, what part of the world. I think these are universal truths
Truths.
that can
Yeah.
apply to all of us, no matter what, we're rich, we're poor, we're young, we're old, we're whatever it ends up being. I really think that they apply to every human being. And that's why I think they're a truth. There's something, and when I call them truths, I mean they're not mine. I don't own them. I don't think you can own a truth. It's something like I say that you and I have talked about. They're universal. They apply to everybody.
Exactly, exactly. So you mentioned about controlling the mind, right? Um, what are some practical strategies that you have mastered that you would suggest people? Because what I have heard from different people and philosophers is like mind is very hard to control. The only way you can control mind is by ignoring the gibberish that mind is speaking and keep the useful. And that's how you can ignore the mind. So I would like to know your strategy. Like, what do you do so that people can use that?
Absolutely. And so there's been all kinds of people that have done studies on how many thoughts pass through our mind every day. And I've heard all kinds of different numbers. I will use one here. There's a healthcare organization here in the United States called the Cleveland Clinic, and they estimate that on any given day, we have about 60 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our mind. And about 95% of those thoughts are the same ones as yesterday or the day before, which means on any given day, we have roughly 3,500 new thoughts that pass through our mind. And let me kind of break this down because I learned this a while ago, but it's something that when I learned it, it was sort of like the light bulb went on. It was like, oh, so thoughts in and of themselves are neutral. They're arbitrary. They come into our brain and they pass on through. Where we tend to get in trouble, and when we talk about controlling the mind, is when we start to think about those thoughts and we apply emotions or feelings or remembrances to those thoughts. Oh, I heard a piece of music and that reminded me of my days in high school. Or, oh, I heard a poem that reminded me of my father's funeral, whatever it ended up being. So now you're applying something to those thoughts. So thoughts in and of themselves don't do anything to us. They're just there. They come in, they go. But when we start to think about them, that's when we get in trouble. That's when oh my gosh, I can't do that. That's a negative thought. That's something. It's only negative if you put that negative emotion on to that thought. So having said all that, I mentioned I was a college basketball player. And let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So if I took a basketball and I went out onto the court and I started to shoot free throws, if you could look at my brain under an MRI, there would be a certain area in my brain that would light up, that was engaged by me shooting those free throws. The interesting thing about that is if I thought about taking that basketball, going out on that court and shooting those free throws, that exact same area of my brain would light up. So whether I physically do it or I think about doing it, my brain, that area of my brain engages. So Bruce Lee, one of the martial artists back in the 60s and 70s, used to talk about be very careful how you talk to yourself. And whether we like it or not, we all talk to ourselves. I mean, we do. We have this little voice that goes on and we have these conversations with ourselves. Be very careful what you say to yourself. Because if you constantly tell yourself, I can't do something, I'm unable to do that, that's hard, that's difficult. If you say it enough times, you think about it enough times, eventually you will wire your brain to the point where, yeah, you're right, you can't do that because you've enforced in your mind that you're unable to do that. Think positive thoughts. And when I had knee surgery in high school, and when I went back playing basketball, I remember my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Like, you're probably a step slower because of your surgeries, and colleges aren't going to be interested in recruiting you. And Arpan, I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are
Mhm.
still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. I learned then that I needed to sort of change what my mind was programming into my thoughts and come up with something more positive.
That's really great explanation. When you were talking about thoughts are being neutral, that was like somewhere buried in my mind, but it just came back. Like, oh yes, I remembered someone saying that, but that was really useful. And you also explained like how your athletic background did help, to strengthen your mind by repeatedly saying positive thoughts to yourself, which built you up. Now, are there any like examples those actually change your path in your life by embracing pain and discomfort uh, that made you stronger by positive attitude, like you had something really bad going on but it just like your thoughts made it happen so that you are right now here in a great position and state.
Absolutely. And, our brains are hardwired, our mammalian brains are hardwired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. So, to the brain, the status quo, the way things are right now, is comfortable and familiar and should be left alone. But we all know this. The only way you're going to grow, the only way you're going to improve, the only way you're going to get better is if you step outside those comfort zones and do things that make you uncomfortable. If you're comfortable, you're not growing. If you're uncomfortable, you have the chance to grow. And so let me give you something I do every day of my life and something I think you can do, your audience can do. This is not a hard thing to do. Every day, do at least one thing that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we unexpectedly get let go from our job. Like me, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness. You will be so much more resilient to handle those things than those people who never step outside their comfort zones and only do things that are comfortable for them.
That makes sense. And that also reminds me one exercise that was suggested to me. And this is more of a philosophical side, right? Like terminal illness or something that actually reminds you of uh, death, which is unavoidable one or the other way. I think contemplating on the truth, the reality that things are going to end one day, that somewhere gives you the strength to utilize today in a best possible way and the years coming so far, because now um, something is ending. Maybe that's somewhere in your philosophy or in your thought does go in parallel with that thought process or not at all.
No, absolutely. I think I read a lot of Stoic philosophy, and the Stoic philosophers used to talk about a Latin phrase called memento mori, which means remember death, remember that you're going to die. And I think death should always kind of be in our peripheral vision. It's not something we should spend a lot of time worrying or
Mhm.
concentrating on, but it should always kind of be out there and something that we're understanding and that we know, like you say, is going to happen to all of us eventually. And not focusing on death for the sake of dying, but focusing on death for the sake of living. If you know your time on this planet is finite, that it's not going to last forever, then it makes you want to, at least for me, it makes me want to understand what's important in my life and concentrate and focus on that, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to live forever. I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll do it next week or next month. Some people don't have that luxury of
Mhm.
next week or next month. Death should always be in your peripheral. Don't be afraid of it, because we're all going to get it. We all get it once. I think that the end product of us being allowed to live and love and laugh and learn is death. And if we don't live, laugh, love, and learn, we're not alive. So we're not going to die anyway. So the fact that we get to live in this life and make it what we want, make it something positive if we want, or some people choose to make it negative, that's your choice, is something that in the end we all get. We all die. We all get death once. It's something that we can't escape. So don't worry about dying. Understand that it's there. Focus more on the living, the purpose for which you were put on this earth to do.
Definitely, definitely. I think this discussion about how to use the process of death in a best positive way, it's going to be definitely helpful for the audience who really want to change their lives. So that's great insight. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So you also mentioned about SWAT, hostage negotiator. Now, I would like to know that what leadership lessons you learn from being hostage negotiator, because you are dealing with basically like criminals or like very bad minds. Like, how have you convinced them? First of all, I want to know whether your job was to convince them or not to do something that is bad for everyone. I'm assuming, right? So can you tell us more about like what leadership lessons you learned that you can share with our audience?
Absolutely. So one of the first lessons when I got on to the hostage negotiation team was they gave us a formula. And I'll tell you the formula, and then I'll explain to you why they gave it to us. The formula was 7-38-55. And that formula has to do with how we as human beings communicate with each other. So 7% of how we communicate a message are the words that we use. And think how many times you've said something and been like, ooh, I wish I wouldn't have said that, or I wish I would have said it in a different way. That's only 7% of how that message comes across to the other person. 38% is your tone of voice. Are you talking real fast and you're really excited and things are going great? Or are you kind of down and depressed and talking slow? However that voice comes across is 38% of how that message is delivered. And then 55%, so more than half of how any message we communicate with each other comes across, is our body language and our facial expressions. And the reason we were given that formula was to help us understand that if somebody had taken a gun and barricaded themselves in a room, that we were not in the room with that person. That would have been unsafe for us to do that. So we may have been outside the door, talking through the door. We may have been down the street, talking on the phone, but we didn't have the luxury of that 55%. We didn't have the luxury of saying something to somebody and see them kind of roll their eyes like, oh, I can't believe he said that to me. So we had to get good at figuring things out, certainly based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it. So how did we do that? We used a couple things. We used what was called tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. And that meant help me understand what's going on, or help me to understand where you're coming from, whatever it was. Because there were a lot of times we would get on scene and have no idea why the person was doing what they were doing. So that understanding leads to trust, and trust hopefully gets me to a point where I can get that person out safely. So it was an understanding. And I think that applies today in all our lives. Can I understand where you're coming from? I may not agree with you, but at least I understand what's going on. And the other thing I will tell you, and I'll give you these last 2 points, we were always taught to be curious. Always, whenever the person said, we would mirror it or parrot it back to them. You know, somehow, oh, you don't think you can do that? And then we would go silent. We would use silence to our benefit. People don't like silence, they'll start talking again. And then the last thing I'll say is, we would use how and what questions. We would stay away from why questions because why questions sound accusatory. Oh, why
Mm-hmm.
did you wear that shirt today? Oh, wait a minute. Does he not like my shirt? I can get to the same answer by saying, what made you decide to wear that shirt today? That's a little less invasive. So, how and what
Mm.
questions, curiosity, and empathy were three big things that we used.
This is great. I never thought about how, why, and sorry, how, what are useful and not why. So I'm probably going to use this with my coworkers tomorrow. Instead of using why, I'll just probe more questions. So great, really, really thankful.
Sure.
Um, Great. So far, I'm making my notes so that I can summarize at the end how great things you have taught me in just 20 minutes. So if you see me distracted, I'm just making my notes.
Sure.
And I think I have one more question for you. Um, how do you in your life balance mental, emotional, and physical well-being in tough time? I know that you have a chronic disease as well as you have knee surgeries, so it's like all together, right? Your body is going through such pain and you're still, your mind is, you know, fresh, so much, happy, the way I'm seeing right now. So instead, like even though having all those pains, like how you keep yourself so motivated? That's what I think audience would like to know, and that's a great thing.
Sure. That's a great question. And I think you need, I don't think, I know, at least I need to find meaning in my misery or a message in my misery. I thoroughly believe we never go through anything in life without there being a lesson that we can learn from it. Now, a lot of people don't learn the lesson, but
Mm-hmm.
finding meaning in your misery has been incredibly important to me. The other thing that's important to me are what I call my three F's, and that stands for faith, family, and friends. I have a very strong belief in God, and I don't put that on anybody. I don't tell anybody they've got to, do religion or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, when I was diagnosed with this cancer in 2012, I was told I would be dead in 2 years. Well, it's almost 13 years later. And when I was diagnosed, I thought, well, okay, you gave me a death sentence. Maybe I can turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And that's really what I've been
Mm-hmm.
trying to do. And I feel now that God is using my infirmity, my sickness, my malignancy to teach other people about God's grace, his love, his mercy, his caring, his compassion, whatever you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel I'm an example. And that is purposeful for me in my life. And I think we have to have a purpose. And I don't want anybody to think that they're not here for a reason, that you just showed up here. And I know a lot of people, I even, when I get treated at the hospital, like, you know what, we come from nothing, we are nothing while we're here, and then we go back to nothing. I don't believe that. They can believe it, but I don't believe that. And if you don't believe me, Viktor Frankl was a concentration camp, a Holocaust survivor during World War II. And he was also a doctor, a psychiatrist. And he talks about having gone through all that misery and surviving those camps, we should not look at our life in the abstract, that every one of us has a reason, a purpose for being on the face of this earth. And we should spend our life finding that purpose. And once we find it, living it. And that will be the fulfillment of what we're supposed to do on the face of this earth.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So I think we have 3 more minutes, but I would like to summarize the best points that those like hit me. The first one, your summary about one of the research in Cleveland, one of the Cleveland hospital about like thoughts, number of thoughts we have, most of them are actually useless because it's repetition of past. and only few thousand, like 35,000, 3,500, you said, are kind of like useful. I never did that kind of research, so I'm really uh, thankful to know at least know that 70% or 80% of the thoughts I can just let go or just throw them away, useless thoughts. Second thing about the hostage negotiation, right? You said 7:38:55. That's also great because now I understand the way we communicate, we barely communicate. And that's in word. I think the 55% that you were missing is the body language, right? When you're not seeing hostages. So talking to people, probably sitting in a chair with sharing a drink, and then try to understand the problem. I think it's a great way. That's what I learned from 7:38 and 55. So that was great. And the third was how, what, and why. I was also really impressed by that as well. And going to avoid why question, as I mentioned, going forward to, not sound insulting or questioning. So far, like everything that I learned was great, and I'm pretty sure that at least these 3 points are all of our audience, your and my audience, if they follow them, I think their life can be better, and they can gather the courage from what all you have said, shared in sharing your experience. I think you are one of the inspiration for them. So I hope our audience will definitely benefit from this conversation, and I'm really thankful to you for meeting me. And I'm hoping to have another conversation for some other day. So be in touch. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Pan, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope our conversation adds value to your audience.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.